Hey everyone, I wanted to make this video for you because in your upcoming milestone assignment, this is one of the most missed sections of this milestone, and I want to make sure that you fully understand it before you go in and start typing up your milestone assignment. So when you are looking at your environmental issue, your problem that is happening in your local community, that environmental problem is affecting ecological processes that are happening in that area. And so it's up to you to decide and to use sources to figure out, which one of these processes is it affecting the most, and you should be highlighting multiple processes, not just one. So we're going to talk about what those processes are. So there's four. There's the water cycle, there's nutrient cycling, which is also called biogeochemical, and there's energy flow in the ecosystem and community dynamics. So I can tell you right now that everyone in here will most likely need to talk about energy flow and community dynamics because those are affected by almost every single environmental problem in the world. But we're also going to discuss each one of these individually so that you can pick and choose which ones you think are most relevant to your topic. So the first one is the water cycle. You're going to want to talk about this if you have any kind of water pollution topic, if you're mainly talking about droughts, any kind of chemical dumping into the water supply, any kind of runoff from fertilizers, from anything that gets put on the land, any kind of plastic pollution affects the water cycle. So the water cycle is basically just how does water move from place to place on the planet. You can see that, we have a lot of water in the oceans. We also have, fresh water on the land. And just by looking at this, the sun causes water to evaporate from these storage areas. And what eventually happens is that evaporation goes up into the atmosphere where it eventually gets too heavy. And so then you have condensation, and eventually it will rain as precipitation. When that water rains down, it goes, onto the land or into the ocean and gets put into freshwater areas. It'll also run off the land into the ocean or into rivers and things like that. So if you have an environmental issue where you have, pollution on the land, anytime it rains, some of that pollution is going to run off into freshwater areas or into eventually making it to the ocean. So any kind of plastic pollution on the land gets pushed into the ocean. Any kind of, oil, fertilizers, sewage, anything that's just sitting out on the land water will rain on it and it will run off into these areas. And that greatly affects that can make an environmental problem worse, or it can cause an environmental problem to happen further from that particular area that you might be focused on. So water cycle, definitely use it for, these topics. So the next ecological process is nutrient cycling. And there's actually subcategories in nutrient cycling, and we're going to go over them. So the first one is carbon cycle. This is going to be for any topic that is addressing climate change, any topic about emissions, any air pollution, plastic pollution, because plastics are made from carbon-based sources. So if you look at, kind of this image here, what you can see is that we release carbon dioxide by burning fossil fuels. We also, animals, so like factory farming releases a lot of carbon dioxide and carbon compounds because we are all carbon-based life forms. So if you have, a factory farm where you have a lot of, livestock, they're also giving off a lot of carbon dioxide. And so what you're kind of seeing here with these arrows is that it's showing you that carbon dioxide is being released. If you see an arrow that's pointing down, that means it's being absorbed. So, CO2 is absorbed a lot by forests. But if you have a lot of deforestation, so that's another topic, like if you chose deforestation, when you chop down those trees, that carbon is now being released to the atmosphere. We also, the ocean is a really big carbon sink. And so it will absorb some of the carbon. However, it will also release carbon if there's too much in the ocean. So if you did a topic about ocean acidification or marine organisms that are any kind of marine ecosystem, you're more than likely going to want to address the carbon cycle as being a process that is affected by your environmental topic. Because the more carbon dioxide we release to the atmosphere, the warmer the planet gets. So that's why I said any climate change topic that you chose is affecting the carbon cycle. All right, next up is nitrogen and phosphorus cycles. This one is a little bit more tailored to specific topics. If your environmental issue that you chose has anything to do with fertilizers, any kind of like sewage, any kind of agricultural topic. So, misuse of agricultural practices, factory farming. If you are addressing any kind of algae blooms or dead zones in the ocean, this is probably one of the cycles you're going to want to talk about. Also, any kind of water pollution, because most water pollution deals with, these nutrients being dumped into waterways or finding their ways into waterways. So what you kind of see here is a phosphorus cycle. This one is very specific. So you may or may not use the phosphorus cycle, but we use a lot of phosphates in farming as fertilizer, and it can, once it rains, like we talked about earlier with the water cycle, it can run off into rivers and streams and dissolve into that water. And what ends up happening is you have something called eutrophication, where you have a big algae bloom and it sucks up all the oxygen out of the water. And now, you've essentially caused this water body to be dead. There's no oxygen in it for these animals to take in. Essentially, the same thing kind of happens with the nitrogen cycle. You can have a lot of like fertilizers that utilize nitrogen compounds. Industries use it a lot for different like cleaning products and things like that. A lot of times we burn nitrogen compounds, and so what ends up happening is that they can go up into the atmosphere and create air pollution. But the main source that we see is similar to the phosphorus cycle, where it runs off the land into a water body, finds its way to the ocean, and can cause these algae blooms and dead zones and pollute the water. So I mean, if your drinking water is an issue, it could be from nitrogen compounds in there or phosphorus compounds in there. But you're going to want to check into that whenever you do your research, like actually make sure that there's references showing that this is a problem in your area and this is what's causing it. So always make sure that you back up, your claims with sources. But I do know, like I said, I'm trying to show you kind of how these topics that you may have chosen are being affected by these, or are affecting these cycles. So when these cycles are working properly, you need phosphate and nitrogen, to have functioning ecosystems. It's whenever you introduce more than what is supposed to be there. For instance, in this one, they're showing how they've caused deforestation. They've, strip mined this area. And so what used to live in this area were trees, and it was in balance, but now these trees are gone. And so the phosphate has either run off or has been, released where it where it shouldn't be. Same thing with nitrogen. You know, we introduce a lot of nitrogen and ammonia from making fertilizer, and if that wasn't there, then it would be more imbalanced. All right, these next two, energy flow and community dynamics, almost every topic that you guys have chosen affects the energy flow of a system. So if you are kind of like, I don't know if water cycle applies to my topic or any of these nutrient cycles, energy flow definitely applies to your topic. And the reason it does is because energy flows through all systems on the earth. And the way that it gets started is we gain light energy from the sun. It arrives at the earth and it keeps plants alive. And plants in turn keep, animals alive. And those animals are eaten by other animals, and that energy passes through that system. Now, most of the energy that is gained from the sun is lost as heat into space, but we still have 10% that passes up through, through the food pyramid is what we call it. And so what you can see kind of in the lower right-hand corner is you have, sun that shines, and your producers, your plants, take it in. They perform photosynthesis and make energy. The primary consumers, the herbivores that eat it, like a cow, or deer or elk or any other kind of herbivore, will eat those plants and gain some of that energy. And then the carnivores, they eat the primary consumers and they gain energy indirectly that way. So great, that's awesome. If this is in balance, great. But you guys are addressing an environmental problem. So more than likely what's happening is that some environmental problem has eliminated or greatly reduced one of these sections of the pyramid. So maybe deforestation knocked out, the producers. Or climate change has caused an ecosystem to be unsustainable. And so what ends up happening is something called a trophic cascade. And so that's where if you take out a type of animal or a type of plant, now you don't have it. And so the ecosystem is unbalanced, and it can lead to extinction level events and things like that. Now, the last one is community dynamics. And that's just changes in an ecosystem over time. And it's kind of looking at feeding relationships or relationships within an ecosystem. So this is going to be really good for anybody who's chosen an invasive species as their topic. If you're addressing, a lack of biodiversity or a loss of it, any kind of environmental pollution that changes the ecosystem, or climate change. So essentially, like, let's say you introduce an invasive species, like you introduce more mice into this ecosystem. What ends up happening is that it overwhelms the ecosystem. It changes the community dynamics totally because they consume, let's say they consume all of the producers in the area. So now there's less food for other animals to eat. Or let's say you introduce, an invasive species of snake, and now there's, more snakes than the community can support, and so they start overeating everything and wiping out different, and it just kind of cascades from there. Same thing with biodiversity. If you only have one single species, that means that the ecosystem is being affected with just that one species instead of having a multi-species ecosystem, which is healthier. Any kind of environmental pollution that's introduced to a community changes that community because now you have organisms that are sick or dying or completely wiped out. Climate change, same thing. It destabilizes the ecosystem. So any of these things you need to address. I would address multiple, at least two. I would pick at least two. So like water cycle and community dynamics, or whatever you find most appropriate to talk about in your milestone section that talks about ecological processes. And if you have any other questions, just feel free to reach out and I can help you out. All right.